I'm working with clients all the time who just want to be confident. I've hired you to make me more confident. And confidence is a byproduct of being really uncomfortable repeatedly to the point where you're building that muscle, and bravery is right there with it. So it's, how do you become brave? You do a lot of things that scare the, do we swear on this?
Hey, welcome everybody. So let me ask you a question. What conversations are you not having because you just don't know how to start them and you don't know what to say? Maybe you have to give some tough love to a family member. Maybe you're at a networking event and you did not engage with anyone, or some criticism maybe to a coworker and you just avoid it. We all do it. There are countless situations where we need to speak up, but we just don't know how to. Fortunately, today's guest, Tucker Miller, does. In fact, she wrote the book on how to get out of your head and into these conversations and through these conversations positively, painlessly, and believe it or not, in most situations, she believes that you can accomplish this with just 4 carefully chosen words. Tucker, I have 4 words for you. Welcome to the show.
Oh,
Thank you very much. Well done. Nice to be here.
Tucker,
Great to have you.
I am especially excited to have you here because this is something I struggle with. Did you know that? I've always struggled with this. People think I'm an extrovert. People think that I have no trouble reaching out and saying things to people. When it comes to difficult conversations, like I'm always finding myself.
I don't know. I think that makes
struggling.
you human, right?
Yeah.
So many people that are very effusive still have trouble with that tough conversation.
It's tough, especially when you're trying to be liked, when you're a person who wants to be liked. So you wrote the book, though.
Right.
The first 4 words. It's a simple, powerful solution to overcoming avoidance and awkwardness. So tell me, why did you write this book, first of all? Like, what was the impetus?
Well, and the key thing I will say is that we're focusing on really how to enter into the conversation, which is the problem solved here. It doesn't have to be perfect. So I want your audience to understand there's no perfect conversation, but the ones that fail most often are the ones that are just never had, never started. And so I am an executive coach and I work with top level leaders in all kinds of organizations, well educated, very influential. And in the work that I did with them, so often we'd come down to a problem that they were having, usually with somebody, a performance issue, an expectation, something going on. And they'd have a problem and we'd start to talk about a solution, which usually involved a conversation that they weren't having. So in exploring the conversation that they might have, should have, agreed that would be helpful if they would have, they kept not having it. And when I asked them, why are you not having it? You said it would be a good idea. You agreed. You were going to commit to it. Why didn't you have it? And I heard repeatedly one phrase that was just making me nuts. And it was, I didn't know what to say. And you look at these people, you are, a captain of industry here, a PhD, and you didn't know what to say. And really what they were saying is not that. They have all the words you could imagine. What they were saying is, I'm so uncomfortable. I'm so afraid I'll mess it up. Yeah. I don't know how the person's going to react. And that story became the reason not to even try the conversation. So I kept thinking, what's the way to solve this? What's the way to get people off the couch and into the conversation and get away from all their hesitancy? And so I started thinking, the first idea that came to me as I was walking around thinking about this over and over and over is that game show, Name That Tune. And there would be this part in the game show where the contestants would sort of vie back and forth about, I can name that tune in 8 notes. Right. And someone else will say 6. And I thought, I wonder if a little bit of gamification might engage people a little bit differently to get beyond the fear and start playing with it. And then the question became, what is the minimum viable product for a productive conversation? So I started listening. I started talking to people. I was writing things down. And there was a sweet spot, 4 words. So in 4 words, you could start the conversation. And so I tested it with my clients. And I'd say, would you have the conversation? Yes. And they would say, I don't know what to say. I'd say, if you could get a conversation started in as few as 4 words, what would you say? Suddenly, they had a couple of ways to start the conversation. And then they either wanted to see if they were right or they wanted to prove me wrong. I don't care either way. The fact that they want to go test it out was really all it took to have the conversation. And I would ask them afterwards, how did you feel when you did that? Well, we came to a resolution and I feel more confident. I feel more empowered. So I knew I was onto something, and that's the long answer for why I wrote the book.
So, why do you think it landed on four words? Like, why not? Why wasn't it 6 or 3?
Well, I did a lot of testing with 2 or 3 or 1. And I worked with someone, she was from New York, and she said, I just don't get it. My husband never understands anything I say. And I said, well, give me some examples. And they came out like, yes, no way. Uh-huh. They were so abrupt. I said, do you think that he's not getting enough context from you to know that you really are listening or engaging? And she said, possibly. I said, just try 4 and see what happens. She came back to me and she said she was walking around the house, always answering and counting on her fingers.
Wow.
But she said, when I took the time to slow down and think something through that had a few more words, he didn't ask so many questions and we weren't having the same argument all the time. So I think there is something that too few is oftentimes too abrupt or doesn't connect quite enough. Why is it 4? I've found that it's the place that people can laser in and start to plan what they want to say, because the briefest way to make the point oftentimes is the most poignant. And you think about headlines and TikTok and shortened attention spans. If I could just laser in, and I always tell people it's a strategy to get started. If what you come up with turns out to be 5 or 6 words, no problem. I don't really care how many words it is. If it empowers you to have the conversation you've been avoiding, job done.
Like, what are some examples of 4 words? Or
it always has to be, do you love me?
Well, the 4 I fear is we need to talk. That's the 4.
We need to talk. Oh, that is one.
Yeah. And that we need to talk, really, we'll come back to that perhaps, but the tone of voice becomes another part of the message here, because a lot of communication is nonverbal. So tone, body language, those kinds of things. But I loved your question, because people go, you mean in 4 words I could do this? What are the 4 words?
Yeah, what are they?
The 4 words?
I'm dying to know.
And the book has literally, I don't know, maybe over 100 examples of different 4-word phrases that can be applied to different situations, including a chapter on, let me save you the trouble. Here's a few 4-word phrases that are probably not going to land very well. One of them being, over my dead body, just never really works well unless you're in the comedy biz. So there are a category of things. Let's agree to agree. Let's stop admiring the problem.
That's
there's
5.
so many different. Was it 5? Let's stop
admiring the
problems.
Just
admiring problems. Yes. Let's stop admiring problems. I knew I had to work with it. And so I have lots of those examples. And again, if it works out to be 5,
True.
we're still having the conversation.
We're splitting hairs here.
We're playing. We're playing.
Yeah.
So it's not just about getting into the conversation, right? Over my dead body. I don't know if anybody would start a conversation with that.
Over my dead body.
There's a lot that have started and stopped with that.
Yeah. But it's just also about keeping the communication going.
Absolutely. In all kinds of situations. So that's why there isn't any one particular phrase, because I've got phrases, this started out to be a book for leaders because that was the problem I was solving. But as I started to talk about it, work with them and listen, there were other family situations, personal situations, and what we do in any one place is what we do everywhere. So starting to think about the phrases that might work best in a networking event.
Yeah. What are some of the hardest conversations that your clients or through your research that you've come across? These difficult conversations that people don't have.
You know, there's two that come immediately to mind. So one is in the category of leadership. I'm working a lot with leaders. And when I started to sit down and think about what are the problematic conversations that they are most typically avoiding,
Right.
or the problems that are coming up because they just never thought to have the conversation, there were four types of leadership conversations that immediately came to mind. And that was, how do we talk about actual performance? What's good performance look like? What's not acceptable? Talking about performance, talking about conduct, people, if they would just be like me, then everything would be fine. And it doesn't work out that way, especially when you think about so much diversity, generational, where people are from. What might be obvious to you is not obvious necessarily to everyone else. So how do you start becoming more deliberate about talking about conduct and performance? And then for leaders, how can I support you? Do you have the support you need? What else do you need? Those kinds of conversations are really critical, as well as giving and receiving, asking for feedback. So questions become a really powerful tool when we start to think about the four words. Maybe you don't start with a statement, you start with, tell me what's going on. How are you doing? Those kinds of things are really important. So that was one category of conversation. The other one is people who are experiencing a setback, a hardship, or grief. And these are the kinds of conversations that are so hard to engage in, that oftentimes people so afraid of saying the wrong thing, or the issue hits so close to home for themselves that they just don't know how to have the conversation. And silence is a powerful communicator, but it doesn't communicate love, empathy, affection, and care. It often is interpreted by the other person as the opposite of that. So how do you start to build a bridge or extend yourself even in those hard times? And I'll tell you, leaders have hardships, setbacks, and grief as well. And that's where that first came to me, but it started to have a bigger impact as I explored that with people.
What examples? I had that as a question. How do you deal with somebody else's loss or tragedy? Because that is almost everybody has that moment of, I don't know what to say. Because I know any words coming out of my mouth, if you just lost somebody close to you, it's not going to be helpful. I know that going in.
Right.
Or I'm just going to say what everybody else said, so why even say it? So I personally have that moment.
Yeah, I think everybody does.
So what are those? What are those four words that you've seen?
Well, I think any four words where you're continuing to say something and that you're extending yourself to the person. We are bringing dinner. There's four. So rather than, so often you have people say, tell me if you need anything. That puts the burden on somebody who's already struggling to make it through the day. So, anyone allergic? I'm bringing dinner over. I'm going to extend myself. I'm going to, here's what I have to offer. The other thing is, just because you don't have the words right now, don't walk away forever. The most impactful words you say might be 4 months after a passing or a tragedy, when everyone has dispersed and we want to think that everything's okay. But how do you extend yourself in ways that are genuinely helpful? I'll keep you in my prayers doesn't necessarily have the same meaning to everyone. It's an accepted common statement that almost, because it's so ubiquitous, is meaningless. So what are the four words that might stand out? What's your favorite flower? I'm bringing some over.
Got it. So there's an action, there's an intention behind the four words.
I've been there too. There are things that, my pain isn't your pain, but I want to understand, or I'm here to listen. That's a powerful one. I'm here to listen.
Great one.
That's a good one.
I'm here to listen.
They probably don't hear that. People don't hear that much.
No. And they may not be ready to talk, but you haven't failed for offering it.
If you have to have a difficult conversation with somebody, and you said it yourself, people don't have that because they worry about how it's going to be received by the other person. You could be seen as attacking. It's a difficult conversation. You could be seen as, they could be getting defensive. How do you preempt that?
One is to catch yourself, to learn how to catch yourself making up the story. So I recently was working with a client, and she had a brand new boss that she'd had for a week, and they were in a meeting. And when I met with my client, she said, I said something in a meeting and my new boss was really angry with me. And I learned right then I should never speak up in these meetings.
Oh.
I said, well, how do you know that she was angry with you? Well, I saw her facial expression. I said, she had an expression, a reaction to something after you said it. She said, yeah. I said, are you a master of her facial expressions after knowing her for only a week? And she said, no, but I know she was mad. I said, how do you know she wasn't, reacting to the lunch she had? And that it was specifically, as you start to learn how to, exactly, bad shrimp, I don't know.
Yeah, right.
But I said, are you really as expert on what's going on in other people's minds as you think you are? So it's really learning how to check the stories that you're making up quite rapidly, automatically. It's one of those unconscious bias things that happens in the back of our mind where you think, that look tells me I should never do that again. And then you think, doesn't it? I need to go check that out. That's the invitation to the conversation, is to interrupt your storytelling that so often we all do, but to overcome it intentionally to find out what's really going on.
Has it ever gone wrong? Like, when you're talking to, sorry. I sometimes have to go to the dark side, but when you're telling a client, okay, this is great. We're going to do this thing, say these 4 words and let's go, let's try it. Have they ever come back and been like, ooh, those 4 words, they did not work?
You screwed up.
Well, they have come back and said, they will sometimes come back and say, that didn't go as planned. I had hoped for something better. We ended up not agreeing on something, but you don't know unless you try. And more often than not, it's better than expected. But the question I always ask, what did you learn?
Yeah.
You're smarter for having tried than just making up fictions that are untested.
I love that.
No, it's funny because everything you're saying sounds so diplomatically put. Right?
What do you mean?
It's a very professional. Clearly, you wrote the book on this. I get it. I just wanted to throw that in there as a commentary. I love the way you're phrasing these questions because it diffuses emotion, right? It doesn't polarize the conversation, which is a great learning. You just
I love how you said that. Can I just want to comment on that? That really is, I think, a goal in the strategy is if we can kind of bring the emotion down to where we're actually talking about the thing instead of, reacting to personalities and trying to change the world that we're in. And we're just talking neutrally about the facts that we are both dealing with. Yeah. Without all the emotion, we can usually get to a better result. And it's all, and the emotion is part of all the stories that have been attributed to the facts. The facts themselves are neutral. So how do you find a way to get to neutral? And this is a strategy to be a little bit more planful about how to enter in what would be a difficult conversation. So do you need this strategy when you're meeting and greeting and it's easy? Absolutely not. In fact, it's really fun to get together with people that you feel really comfortable with and you're joking and talking and nobody's going to be counting words. But when it's kind of a higher stakes, uncomfortable, I'm uncertain, and I'm inclined to step away from the conversation, this is the strategy to be more planful and enter in.
I feel like it's like diversionary tactic, right? So you're going in, you're going to have a difficult conversation, but if you're like, okay, I need 4 words, and how am I going to do those 4 words? And, let's place these correctly and take the emotion out. It's almost like it takes away from the impact of the difficult conversation, right?
Yeah.
It's brilliant.
Yeah.
I have this phrase I use called 7 seconds of clarity, and I've used it forever.
Nice.
And my whole point with that is, you're complaining about this person's complaining about XYZ. And I'm like, if people would just take 7 seconds of a conversation and just state what is on your mind, so much could be solved in 7 seconds. Just 7 seconds of clarity.
100%.
You made that up?
I did.
I love it.
Thank you.
It's sort of like it's the next chapter. Like
There was a Game Changers
4
trademark right there.
words and 7 seconds.
Yeah, right. So I know you said brevity and courage. I don't know where I read this or whatever, but brevity and courage are the keys to, I guess, a good conversation or the starting of a conversation. And it kind of fits with what I just said. Just 7 seconds, but you got to be brave enough to say it. So
That's right.
Where does that come from? Right? At what point do you just say, I know what to say? I still can't do it.
Right. You got to be brave. How do you get brave?
Yeah.
How do you get brave? So I'm working with clients all the time who just want to be confident. I've hired you to make me more confident.
Interesting.
And confidence is a byproduct of being really uncomfortable repeatedly to the point where you're building that muscle, and bravery is right there with it. So it's, how do you become brave? You do a lot of things that scare the... Do we swear on this?
I want to hear that confidence thing again. So confidence is a byproduct of, say that again.
Of being uncomfortable over and over and over, to where eventually you become not only more comfortable, but confident. Bravery works the same way. So if you want to be more brave, find something scary. Yeah. And for a lot of people, having a conversation seems to be pretty scary.
Right.
You want to be more brave in your life, practice with conversations, because what you do, as I said, what you do anywhere is what you do everywhere. So bravery can be really honed through having uncomfortable conversations, to where suddenly you find yourself speaking in public. You might be on a stage. All those things are possible if you just leverage some discomfort.
So what happens after the 4 words? Like, what is there a playbook? Do you have, is it in your book? I haven't read your book yet. I need to read your book.
Where's the rest of the script, right?
Yeah, so I want you to tell me exactly what to say after I say the 4 words. Go.
Yeah.
Tucker.
You know, whole scripts. In fact, there are people who have written whole scripts, whole models for conversations. And I've written some of those. I've taught some of those. And what I find is, as cool as they are in a learning environment, they don't really work very well in life, because nobody can really remember. That was cool when I learned it, but now in the heat of the moment, I can't remember all of it. And that became one more reason not to have the conversation. So I thought, let's just focus in on the starting. And what happened is, when people had a way to start, the hunger for engagement and solution automatically fuels the rest of the dialogue. It would be a disservice to give you the script for the whole conversation, because I'll tell you right now, it doesn't happen that way. And I started my career as a trial attorney. I was always on the defense side of things, so I could never walk in with the script. The plaintiff's attorney get to speak first. They get the whole script. They get to control the argument. And I just have to listen very intently and then respond. And that really is how conversation should and does work in real life. So it's the listening that will inform the next step.
I had, Stacy and I were talking before we came out here, that I worked for a company that wrote reports. And one of the best-selling report of all time was exactly a script for how do I tell an employee, because it was B2B, how do I tell an employee that they smell? I mean, it's a bizarre thing, but that hits such a nerve, because if you want to talk about difficult conversations, I didn't tell anybody that, right?
Yeah.
It's funny though, because you're saying like, yeah, that's a script, that's fine. But when you get in that moment,
if you tell me I smell
that way, because we don't know how the other person's going to respond. Exactly. Are they going to be surprised? Are they going to be embarrassed? Are they going to disclose a medical situation that you were completely unaware of and that is not covered by the script? Right. And I'm speaking as a former employee relations director. I have a lot of experience in HR, and I've had that very conversation. And I think the power of that script is it modeled for people that this is a conversation that other people have. You need to have it. It can be had But in some ways, it's sort of a disservice because it's never going to look like what the script is. But they do affirm this is a conversation worth having.
I had one twice. I had to tell someone, different job, that people were smelling alcohol in their breath.
Oh my.
Yeah. Yeah.
And one of them, as it turns out, had a problem.
Right.
And the other one didn't. The other one was just like, oh, I did dinner and wine.
Went to happy hour.
You know, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, that was, and she admitted to me in that moment that she had a problem, which made it worse, of course, for me, probably for her as well. But that was a really tough conversation to have.
But you think about what would have happened if you never had it.
You might have saved your
You're
life.
setting yourself and others up to fail in potentially a life and death situation.
Yeah.
And that's really the challenge is so many people avoid the conversations that really could have a positive impact. But that's not the story the back of our brain tells us.
Yeah,
it's going to go bad.
Yeah,
it's going to be
point.
uncomfortable.
Yeah, you look at the end goal. The end goal is you're actually helping. As uncomfortable as it seems, yeah, you're serving a greater good.
Now, I didn't have as much trouble with coworkers as I do with my family. Like, is there a different sort of direction that you go with people who are super close to you that, you know, or you know that you're going to hurt their feelings in some way, or like maybe you just don't want to go to Thanksgiving dinner, or is there, do you know what I mean?
Sounds like a very real example.
You don't want to have it at your house this year. But this literally happens though, that people, I will be talking to people and they'll say, oh, I don't want to host, but I don't want to tell my family because I've done it every year. And
oh, I get it. Yeah.
Right. So it's not even,
that's a hard conversation.
Yeah, it's a hard conversation. So what would you say in that scenario, Tucker?
Well, there's so many layers, but first I would acknowledge, when you got a family situation there and they know all your stuff and you know their stuff, or at least we think we do, and we think we know even our own stuff, and we may or may not, because they may see things that we don't see. It is a little bit more layered, less clinical. You don't have employment policies to, pull up and say, this is the way it is. And oftentimes it is a bigger conversation. And there are things that you could say to highlight what you love about being together and how we are celebrating. Let's enjoy this time. Let's, find another place and time for the conversation. The best time to have the conversation about shifting responsibilities in a holiday is before the holiday itself, to not walk in that way.
Or just not show up.
That's right. So I do have a chapter on how to smooth family gatherings. I mean, family members
that's a big one.
are their own, characters. So there's only so much, you can achieve, but it's still worth having. One of the ones I like is let's agree to agree. And that means we're going to find the places where we can agree. Let's discover that, because we're focused so much on where we don't agree.
Right.
That's really not even conducive to moving forward. So let's start with, let's agree to agree.
Oh, I love that one. Let's agree.
Where do we start?
Mark.
That's
for
never
once,
happen.
For once, can we agree to agree?
I don't see it happening.
It may not be as entertaining, but it can be a lot more productive. So, where do we start would be the next question. 4 words.
Where do we start? Oh, I love that too. Oh, I can't wait to read this book.
I know there's so much good stuff in there.
Yeah.
I think the problem with politics is there's just a lack of tolerance for the conversation, regardless of how it started.
That's true.
There's an immediate
rhetoric is not a conversation.
Right. Exactly. It's not even that's a very good point. It's not even a conversation. It is one person saying one thing and the other person not letting it in, then that second person saying back and the first person not letting it in. So there's just a trench warfare right down the middle. But you're right. I miss those days. I miss those days of just having sit around and talk about religion and politics.
Yeah. What are 3 ways to become comfortable having hard conversations?
Stuff.
Well, the first thing I would do is think about what's my goal? Where's the place I want to move to? And you may not achieve the entire goal, but incrementally, what would be a good next step? And then what am I afraid of? Once you name it, it becomes a lot easier to manage it. It's the unnamed fear that starts to rule our lives. And then if you could start the conversation in 4 words, what would they be? And the rest is gravy.
She nailed that. She nailed that.
Great.
That was amazing. I love it. And then, so one other thing, so what do you think the ultimate reward is when someone masters this process of having these hard conversations?
That is such a good question, because a lot of times yay, I did it. A lot of times we measure success of, did I win the argument?
Yes.
Did I persuade? Did I make them say they were sorry? And if you're always looking at the end game to measure your success, you're going to be coming out 50-50 more often than not. But did I move the ball a little bit closer to a place of understanding and safety with this person that will help me move it forward in other conversations with the next person? That's that building that confidence muscle. Was I brave and courageous and planful? Did I have the uncomfortable conversation? Good on me. I'm going to keep doing it.
Yeah, it's definitely a muscle you have to keep working to get confident and to not be fearful.
That's the hardest.
It is so hard. Because guess what? These situations, they don't come up that often. They're not an everyday thing, right? We just go through our lives. And I think maybe we're used to just avoiding it. So.
Or we do tackle some of them. Like, I feel like, have you ever read the book, The Universe Has Your Back?
No.
So that's a book that like basically says that if you have to work on something, like for me, I'm always working on this, having these difficult conversations with people and being like assertive and not being a people pleaser. That's what I'm working on. And it always seems to circle back to me. You know, like the universe has your back. It's always going to throw that at you until you master it.
Until you figure it out.
Right.
Yeah.
You know, I like that perspective, because one of the things, having written this book, I find myself kind of, here's a conversation I particularly don't really want to have. And I think, darn it, I wrote the book on it.
You have no excuse.
You have no excuse.
Come on.
I'm going to have the conversation. I need to be a role model.
You
but
do.
it's again, finding that way to kind of coach and catch yourself, whether it's the universe that I'm going to be working with or it's just my own mind. I'm going to notice that and then make different choices. And it's a wake up.
Love it. So wait, what's next for you, Tucker? What's your next book?
What's next for me? Well, someone told me about this book. She said, here's the one thing I hate about it. I was like, what?
Ooh,
she
ouch.
goes, this book would have been so helpful to me in so many ways. And I hate that you're calling it a business book. She said, slap a different color on it, put some different stories in it, come out with a second volume that will help me with my husband, my family members, my brownie troop, and everybody else in the world, maybe taking on politics and religion as well. So if you see an orange copy on the first 4 words, you'll know that I took up the charge.
I love it.
But otherwise, I'm looking for more speaking engagements. I do workshops and webinars and opportunities for people to have the kinds of conversations that we're having, but also honing in their skills and strategies.
Yeah, it's so needed. That's awesome.
Your friend really needed your book, because here's what I hated about it.
I was thinking that. What a way to start the conversation.
That's not a really good way to start the conversation.
Not very
so I'm
helpful
glad
at
she's
all.
reading
She had
it.
my attention.
Yeah, she did.
That's true.
Yeah, she did.
She probably knows you real well, and she knows you won't be offended by that. But
That's awesome. Oh, we can't thank you enough. This has been an awesome conversation.
I loved this conversation.
Yeah.
And I'm going to get your book immediately.
Thank you.
This has been great. So thank you all for watching. We will see you soon. I've been upstaged by him.